Nora Arden was still smiling for the cameras when Lila Thorne leaned in, lips barely moving. "You're far too poor to belong at Château Valen," she murmured voice sugar over glass. The invitation was a courtesy. "Surely you understand." The champagne in Nora's hand quivered. She'd saved for weeks to buy this simple navy dress, choosing dignity over groceries, telling herself appearances mattered only because this was her only son's engagement party. "Ethan wants me at his wedding," she managed. "I'm his mother." Lila's laugh was delicate and cold. "Ethan wants a future, my family's future, connections, access, standards." Her polished fingers toyed with a bracelet as her gaze slid down Nora's dress. "The ceremony at Valen is extremely exclusive. Let's not make a scene." Across the ballroom, Ethan Arden, handsome, composed, perfectly tailored, stood with Lila's silver-haired father, a man who shook hands like he owned the room. When Lila lifted one finger, Ethan came at once. "Everything all right?" he asked, not meeting Nora's eyes. "Your mother's confused about the arrangements," Lila said smoothly. "The venue has limitations." Nora waited for Ethan to say the obvious, that his mother would be there, that no list could exist without her name. Instead, he cleared his throat. "Mom, there are expectations at Valen. Lila's family worked hard to secure it. It's complicated." "You're ashamed of me," Nora said, amazed at how steady her voice sounded, while something inside her unraveled. "Not here," Ethan hissed, glancing at the watching faces. "We can talk later. There's nothing to discuss." Nora set her glass on a passing tray and lifted her chin. "Enjoy your exclusive wedding." She left the ballroom to a corridor of marble and mirrors, holding herself together by habit more than strength. Outside, the night air was cool and unsentimental. She stood beneath the hotel's arch and counted her breaths the way she had taught herself to do after Thomas died, and the debts arrived like weather steady, indifferent, inescapable. Château Valen. She hadn't spoken the name aloud in decades yet. It carried sunlight and dust and the rush of being 17. In another life, the estate had been a ruin with good bones and a lake like a secret. Adrian Valen. Her first love, the heir to a crumbling inheritance, had called her Spark because she could find light in anything. He'd shown her his leather notebook of plans, scaffolds traced in pencil gardens, sketched back to order a ballroom reborn. One day he'd promised, "You'll be here with me saving paintings while I save the stone." Then his family collapsed in earnest, and Adrian was shipped off to relatives in Europe. Letters dwindled, then stopped. Life remade itself. Nora married. Thomas learned to stretch money and time the way she mended canvas carefully and visibly. She cleaned smoke-dull landscapes for small museums, raised Ethan on determination and second-hand coats, and measured happiness in quiet increments. And now her son would be married at the very place that once held her fiercest dreams, and she was apparently the wrong sort of guest. On the curb, headlights slid by like indifferent comets. Nora pressed her palm to the cool stone and felt the oldest part of herself stir the part that had refused to accept that broken meant finished. She pictured Adrian's neat looping script, the way he'd written Spark with a flourish, as if naming could conjure heat. Maybe the estate's new glory had nothing to do with him. Maybe the Valen name had been sold, the story rewritten by strangers with money. Maybe reaching backward was foolish. Still, a thought flickered stubborn as a pilot light fined him. Not to beg for favors, not to barter her son back from pride, but to remember the girl who believed restoration was a kind of love. If Château Valen had been remade, perhaps she could be too. Nora straightened, wiped a stray mascara line with the pad of her thumb, and walked into the night with a decision warming her hands. She would try to reach Adrian Valen. She would not let anyone, venue pedigree, or polished insult tell her where she did and did not belong. Nora let Ethan's calls stack up like unpaid bills. Each voicemail carried the same polished impatience. Mom, be reasonable, as if reason were a currency she could tender at the door of a life that no longer wanted her. Work was steadier ground. She bent over a 19th century landscape in her studio, coaxing smoke and city grime off the varnish with the slow choreography she trusted cotton swab solvent breath held. Bit by bit, the bleached river regained depth, the trees their whisper of green. For a few hours at a time, the world beyond the easel went quiet. When the silence cracked, she climbed a chair to tug down an old hat box. Inside lay the breadcrumb trail of a girlhood ticket stubs. Sun-brittled photos, a pressed fern that crumbled at a touch, and beneath them, the leather sketchbook. Adrian's sketches were still sure and eager, the north facade scaffolded into possibility, the ballroom ceiling mapped in pencil and promise. On the final page, he had drawn the two of them at the restored entrance and written in his looping hand, "Spark." She traced the word with a fingertip, amused and undone, to find it still warm after half a century. On a late-night impulse, she pulled up the Château Valen website. It glittered with professional praise, honeyed stone formal gardens, stern with order, light poured into rooms meant for magazines. At the bottom of the About page sat a contact form. She typed a short note that refused either apology or melodrama. "I spent my summers long ago on these grounds with Adrian Valen. I still have his early restoration sketches. If he remains connected to the estate, would you please pass along my greetings?" She attached a photo of the notebook's final page and pressed send before courage could evaporate. Morning delivered a number she didn't recognize, and when she answered, a voice she would have known in a crowded station. Nora Arden. The tenor was deeper worn at the edges, but unmistakable. "Adrian," she said, sitting without meaning to. "It's really you." So the legend of the hat box was true. He teased relief threading through the words. "You kept those drawings." They were the only part of that summer that didn't fade. There was a small, respectful quiet. "I tried to find you when I first came back. I was a decade late and 3 phone books short. Before the internet made nostalgia a blood sport." She laughed, the sound surprising her. "I was married by then. Boston, 1 son. I'm sorry about your husband." He left space for her to place the grief where she wanted. When she did not, he continued, gentle but direct. "Will you let me feed you dinner? I'm in town at the Fairmont, 8. The name of the restaurant Oak Room rose in her mind with dark wood and brass, the kind of room where old money breathed in complete sentences. She looked at the paint-spattered sweater she wore and felt a passing wave of absurdity. Then she remembered the emerald dress that still fit and the pearl earrings that still hurt a little less each year. "Yes," she said. 8. The Oak Room was golden and exacting. Adrian rose when she approached, taller than memory hair gone silver, in a way that made his face more legible. His smile landed with the same ridiculous clarity as it had when he was 17 and sure the future would take notes. "You look like yourself," he said, not glancing at the dress or the earrings or any of the armor she had assembled. "It's good to see you, Spark." They ate slowly and talked the way people do when the subject is time. He told her how an uncle in Provence had taught him stone and patience. How they had bought the estate back, how restoration had become vocation, then enterprise, then almost despite him brand. "Sometimes I wonder what we lost when we made it perfect," he admitted. "I wanted beauty. We ended up with exclusivity." She told him what can be told in a first evening, the careful arithmetic of widowhood, the museums that pay in thank yous, the pride she took in every saved canvas. She did not mention the engagement party until he asked, eyes steady, "How did we find each other now?" "Your chateau," she said, and the word "your" did the work of a paragraph. She described Lila Thorne's smile, Ethan's practiced silence, the sentence that had escorted her to the door. She kept it lean. He provided the outrage. "No one decides you don't belong in my house," he said simply, and she felt the old architecture inside her shift. By coffee, he had asked the question that changed the rest. "Come out to Valen next weekend. I've pulled a dozen paintings from storage that need a conservator's eye. No promises, no pressure, just your judgment. Let me show you what the place became." Professionally, it was the kind of work she'd built a life for. Personally, it was a door she had once dreamed of and then boarded over. She pictured the long drive under the beaches, the ballroom unslept by time, the tower room where the wallpaper bled sky. "All right," Nora said. "I'll come." Outside, the city wind was knife-bright. He walked her to a cab, hands in his pockets, like a man remembering how to keep them to himself. "Wear shoes you don't mind walking in," he called as the door closed. "There's a great deal to see." On the ride home, she listened to the tire hum and realized the thing humming in her chest matched it beat for beat. Not triumph, not yet, but readiness. It felt like a spark deciding finally to be fire. The car turned off the state road and onto a beach-lined drive that curved like a ribbon toward Château Valen. Nora had told herself she was coming for work, 12 canvases pulled from storage. Nothing more but the first glimpse of honeyed stone knocked the air from her lungs. The estate she remembered as scaffolds and weeds now gleamed. Slate rooflines met sky with the right kind of confidence. The restored facade did not shout. It held its breath. Adrian was waiting on the steps in a light sweater and dark jeans, neither host nor tycoon, so much as a man who had learned what to keep. "You came," he said the same words he'd used at dinner, as if some part of him had feared she might vanish between decision and arrival. "I said I would." Nora took his offered arm with a steadiness she didn't feel. The door opened on marble and light. The past adjusted its posture. He didn't rush the tour. In the great hall, he paused for the story of the stone, what they'd salvaged, what they'd replicated. In the south drawing room, he ran a palm over paneling rescued plank by plank from the mill. He spoke like a builder who'd earned the right to be proud. "The gallery first," he said at last, "so we don't make the paintings wait." He led her to the east wing, where tall windows ate a long room generous. Easels stood beneath proper conservation lamps. The air smelled faintly of linen and wood glue. It was the opposite of a magazine spread. No flowers, no props, only work. Nora put on cotton gloves and slipped easily into the grammar of her trade-raking light magnification ultraviolet. She made notes in a small book, a column for observations, a column for questions. A harbor scene with aggressive overpaint, likely 19th century school copy. A pastoral obscured by nicotine and a coal fire's ghost. A portrait with a tear along the sitter's shoulder, the linen puckered like an old scar. Halfway down the row, she stopped. "This one," she said softly. Adrian came to stand beside her. On the easel was a small canvas gone near black with varnish. Under the yellowed film, a young woman sat by a window, with her head inclined toward a book. The brushwork, what little showed, was economical and tender. The light along the girl's temple felt like breath. Who, he asked. Early American period. Or, Nora tilted the lamp and moved her lens. No, Paris. The hand suggests Mary Cassatt before full confidence. See the way the paint sits in the shadow. The wrist anatomy, the reserve along the cheek. She felt the old pleasure of recognition, not the lottery jackpot wish of collectors, but the quieter joy of seeing a mind at work beneath grime. "If it is," Cassatt, Adrian's voice was careful, "then it deserves a slow, patient cleaning and a clear authentication path," she said. Dendrochronology, if the panel is original. Provenance. Comparative study. It could also be a student with similar training. Either way, someone loved this. They moved on. Another canvas, possibly Corot. Possibly a disciple had been scraped by an earlier restorer with more bravado than skill. She explained how retouching worked when done properly. Reversibility, restraint, respect. He listened as if these were not merely rules, but a philosophy he could sign his name under. By late afternoon, the light turned to the side of the room Nora always favored. They sat on the bench with bottled water while she summarized triage and sequence, stabilized the portrait tear first, clean tests on the harbor, a conservative approach to the Cassat suspect with documentation at every phase. Adrian asked good questions. He had the practical curiosity of someone who'd run projects and absorbed their costs, not only dollars and days, but the price of doing a thing the wrong way. There's something else he said when they stood, before dinner. Come. He took her up a narrow staircase behind a mostly forgotten door, the wood polished by generations of hands. They emerged into an octagonal room in the tower, small and high with faded blue paper and window seats, smoothed to softness by summer knees. It had been their refuge where they'd read poetry and traced the weather and talked reckless plans into dusk. Now it was almost exactly the same. You kept it, Nora said, surprised by the ache in her throat. I thought about repainting, Adrian admitted. Then I couldn't. Everything else needed a second chance. This needed to remember. He didn't reach for her hand. He rested his on the sill and let the air between them do the work of touch. Sometimes when everything downstairs is decisions and schedules and insurers, I come up here to remember why I wanted any of it. It was this once, this view. The word landed like the gentlest of knocks. Nora looked out across the grounds. Formal gardens disciplined into arabesques, the old lake caught in evening light, and understood both the loss and the gain. The wildness had been tamed, yes, but the bones were true. At dinner, in a private paneled room, they traded the long shapes of their lives. He told her about Provence and a patient uncle who taught him to read stone the way some men read faces. About buying the estate back not as an act of revenge, but as a vow kept. About how success had turned into exclusivity when he wasn't watching. We restored it to be lived in, he said. Then somewhere along the way, it became somewhere people wanted to be seen. She told him about canvases and budgets and how much of conservation was the art of knowing when to stop. About widowhood's math and the one painting she had bought for herself, even when she shouldn't have. She said less than she could have about the engagement party. He understood enough without extra paint. Then let me be plain, Adrian said, setting his glass down with the finality of a decision. No one tells you you can't walk into a house with my name on it. If Lila Thorne and your son intend to marry here, they will treat you with respect, or they will marry somewhere else. Please don't fight my battles, Nora said, from an instinct older than pride. I don't want to be a performance. I won't make a scene, he said. I will set terms. He softened. But perhaps we can avoid it altogether. If we meet this as colleagues, owner and conservator, and as old friends, the rest may arrange itself. If it does not, I will arrange it. They were about to return to the gallery for one more look at the Cassat when voices pitched beyond polite rows in the hall. A staffer knocked and, mortified, explained that Ms. Thorne insisted the matter of floral arches could not wait. Send her to the main salon, Adrian said. She's already on her way, sir. The door opened before he finished the sentence. Lila Thorne entered with the confidence of someone accustomed to being forgiven. Ethan followed, his jaw set with embarrassment he couldn't quite hide. Nora, he blurted, I didn't know you were here. His gaze flicked to Adrian. Mr. Valen, thank you for seeing us. Ms. Thorne. Adrian said, every inch the landlord of his own dignity. Mr. Arden, I wasn't expecting you. This won't take a moment, Lila said, already stepping forward with a bright smile that pretended there had been no past offense. Our planner is enthusiastic. I wanted to confirm the arbor dimensions personally. We can do that tomorrow, Adrian replied. Tonight, I'm with a guest. Lila's smile froze when she finally took in Nora by the table with notes and a loop of magnifier around her neck. Your mother is consulting, she said to Ethan in a tone aimed to sound surprised rather than dismissive and hitting both. She is? Adrian answered before Ethan could. Ms. Arden is assessing a group of family paintings for a restoration program. She is here at my invitation. The room held for a beat. Nora could have let it pass. Instead, she stood and said simply, "Good evening, Lila." Ethan found his manners first. "Good evening." Lila rearranged her face. "How industrious," she said, softening the word, as if it were quaint. "Let's be clear," Adrian said, the velvet gone from his voice. "My home does not admit hierarchies of worth. If you intend to marry here, Ms. Thorne, you will treat Ms. Arden as you would treat me. If that is a problem, there are other venues." Lila looked to Ethan with a flash of calculation. Ethan looked at Nora. For a breath, she saw him as a boy again, the one who'd believed her entirely when she'd said, "A broken thing could be made whole." "There's no problem," he said. "None at all." "Good," Adrian said, with the finality of a door closing gently but completely. "Then we're done for the evening. My coordinator will confirm tomorrow's appointment." When the door shut behind them, Nora let out a breath she hadn't meant to hold. That was decisive. "That was minimal," he said. "You deserved a great deal more." He walked her to the library fire and poured 2 small whiskeys he claimed were for medicinal purposes. They stood in companionable silence while the flames argued quietly with themselves. "He'll come back," Adrian said. "Alone." He did. 20 minutes later, Ethan returned to the small sitting room as if he'd knocked on fate's office door. He perched on the edge of a chair that seemed inclined to slip him onto the rug. "Mom," he started, then swallowed the word. "Nora." He glanced at Adrian. "May I speak with her?" Adrian set his glass down and left without ceremony, as if this were an ordinary courtesy. His hand brushed Nora's shoulder on the way out, a small benediction. Ethan's composure buckled as soon as they were alone. "I'm sorry," he said, the 2 words rough with effort. "About the party, about not saying anything. I told myself I was choosing the future when really I was choosing the easiest room." "I didn't need you to fight," Nora said. "I needed you to stand." "I know." He scrubbed a hand over his face. "Lila's father's firm represents Mr. Valen. I thought the venue mattered more than the optics of inviting of." He stopped, ashamed to finish a sentence that had started life in the mouth of someone else. "You thought the room would be impressed if your mother was not there," she said evenly. "You were wrong." He flinched. "If you know Mr. Valen, if you're working here, then of course you should be at the wedding." "Lila will understand." "I won't come as leverage," Nora said. "If I come as your mother, not as a door opener." He nodded too fast. "Yes. Yes." Then after a beat, the part of him that still calculated lifted its head. Would you mention me to him? It would help if he heard from you that I—" "No," she said, not unkindly. "This you will make right yourself." He breathed out, cheeks flushed with shame and relief. "Okay." He stood. "I'll try to be the kind of man you raised." "Try less," Nora said. "Be more." When he had gone, Adrian returned with a look that managed to be both questioning and certain. "You were generous," he said. "I set terms," she answered. "The rest is his." He considered her for a long moment. "Stay tonight," he said finally. "The drive back is long. I can put you in the blue suite. The sunrise there will make a believer of you." "The practical answer is no," Nora said, thinking of routines and the safety of withdrawing before she could be accused of wanting what she wanted. "The honest answer is yes." He didn't touch her in victory. He smiled like a man proud of his own restraint. "I'll have everything sent up." The blue suite had tall windows and a bed that looked like a good argument for staying in one place. On the nightstand, someone had placed a small vase of rosemary and a card with the Wi-Fi code written in a hand, so neat it could only be staff. Nora stood at the window and allowed wonder the space to stand beside her. A week earlier, she had been told she was the wrong sort of guest for this place. Tonight, she would fall asleep inside it without apology. Morning was pastry and coffee, and the easy shorthand of people who now knew which stories to save for later. Over the second cup, Adrian made an offer that was both generous and precise: 3 days a week in residence, with full facilities lodging when needed, a fee that respected the work. "It's not charity," he said when she hesitated. "It's a commission, and a selfish one. I want it done right. I want it done by you." Professionally, Nora said, because boundaries made all other doors possible. Professionally, he agreed, and then softer. "We'll let the rest find its own shape." They reviewed next steps in the gallery until noon, argued amicably about solvents, and laughed once. Really laughed when she corrected his pronunciation of a French supplier, and he corrected her Latin plant name for the panel's backboard. It felt like a friendship learning how to wear a future. 2 days before the Thorn Arden rehearsal dinner, Nora packed the small wardrobe that had accumulated in a corner of the blue suite work jacket. Clean blouse, the black flats that could walk all day without complaint. Adrian watched from the doorway, the line of his mouth somewhere between amused and put upon. "You don't have to go," he said. "I do," she said. "They deserve their space, and I deserve mine." He crossed the room in 3 quiet steps, then stopped, hands at his sides like a gentleman at a threshold. "I've been patient," he said, and the words were not a demand but a confession. Not out of virtue, but because I didn't want us to mistake gratitude for something more. But Nora, she met him in the middle, saved him the indignity of explaining joy. The kiss was not the greedy miracle of movies, it was something steadier. A precise meeting after a long miscalculation, a homecoming that didn't require spectacle to count as true. When they stepped apart, they both looked absurdly like people who had been made younger by nothing but air. "I'll be back in 2 days," she said, smoothing the jacket that had no wrinkles. "I'll be here," he answered. "Wear shoes you can dance in." On the drive to Boston, the world looked the same and not at all. Storefronts were still chipped. The river still pretended to be steel under an ordinary bridge. But inside her, something had been returned to the register it was tuned for all along. Not triumph, the wedding would be what it would be. Not revenge, nothing clean ever came from that. Readiness again, and a vow of her own to accept nothing less than respect, starting with the version she could give herself. At a red light, she caught her reflection in the rear view, no younger, no richer, no different to anyone who passed, and smiled anyway. Château Valen would stand whether she came back or not. But the part of her that had thought broken, meant finished, was quiet, for the first time in years. She could mend, she would not make herself invisible to make anyone else comfortable. And when she thought of the tower room, the little octagon, where the paper had the right to keep its fading, she understood some things are restored, some are left intact. The art is knowing which. The morning of the wedding arrived as clear as glass. Nora Arden laid the copper silk dress across her bed and tried not to measure herself against a room full of strangers she hadn't met yet. She fastened the small pearl earrings she hadn't worn in years, watched how they caught the light, and reminded herself that jewelry isn't courage, but it can sit nearby. A brief message glowed on her phone. "The chateau awaits you. See you at 4. AV." The economy of Adrian Valen's words steadied her. Vivian pulled up right on time, leaning across the console to whistle at the dress. "You look like a verdict," she said, delighted. "Let's go." The highway unspooled, the suburbs softened to pasture, and then the beaches appeared, drawing the eye towards stone and slate. Staff directed traffic with quiet precision. Adrian waited at the entrance in a tuxedo that made him look like a signed decision. His smile reached her before he did. "There you are," he said, and the relief in his voice untied a knot Nora hadn't realized she carried. He greeted Vivian with easy warmth, then offered Nora his arm. For once, she didn't argue with the formality, she took it. Inside the world held its breath the way old houses do when they're about to host something irrevocable. Whispers tilted toward them as they passed, curious, not cruel. Nora kept her eyes where they were useful. The garden ceremony had been carved out of symmetry, rows of white chairs, a quiet arbor, the lake beyond like a kept promise. Adrian led Nora to the front row on the groom's side. "This is the family section," she murmured. "Exactly," he replied. Music began. Lila Thorne appeared in a gown built to win the room. She won it. Ethan waited at the arbor, hands tense, expression earnest. When he saw Nora, something in his face lifted and then settled, as if he'd found his place on a map. The vows were clean and practiced. No one said anything about who deserved to be there. The air did not fracture. When the recessional carried the couple back up the aisle, Ethan's gaze met Nora's. He didn't mouth sorry. He didn't need to. She gave a small nod. It was enough for a beginning. The reception returned everyone to the chateau, where the grand ballroom looked precisely like itself, an argument for light and high ceilings. A string quartet played the kind of music that doesn't demand attention but earns it. Adrian's presence veered between host and anchor. People came to greet him, and therefore her. He introduced Nora without embroidery. "This is Nora Arden, the conservator overseeing our collection and an old friend." The phrase "old friend" sat in the air with the weight of something chosen. Dinner worked as dinners do when people are pleased to be seen. Vivian made quick allies of the table and quicker work of the bread basket. Across the room, Lila's smile was immaculate. Whatever she felt about the day's new geometry didn't bleed through porcelain. After the cake was admired and the toasts adhered to their scripts, the DJ announced the parent dances. For a single taut beat, Nora considered the mechanics of escaping politely. Then Ethan stood in front of her, offered his hand, and didn't try to arrange his face into anything but sincerity. "Mom," he said clearly enough to carry simply enough to count. "May I?" On the floor, he kept the steps small so she wouldn't have to think about anything but listening. "I was wrong," he said under the music. "I told myself I was choosing a future. I was choosing ease. Mr. Valen asked me what kind of man I want to be. I didn't like my answer. I am sorry." Nora looked at the boy she had walked to school in winter boots 2 sizes too big, and the man who had mistaken audience for value. "I'm proud of you," she said, because it was true and because truth deserved to be said aloud. "I was hurt. I still am, a little." Those can live in the same sentence. He closed his eyes just once in relief. "I'll be better," he promised. "Be present," she corrected gently. Better follows. When the music ended, he hugged her too tightly, and the room pretended not to see a groom cry. Nora returned to the table with the odd lightness that follows a thing set down. Adrian caught her hand beneath the linen. "Walk," he asked. They stepped through tall doors onto the terrace where the last of the day had gathered itself into gold. From here, the formal gardens were patterns and restraint. Beyond them, the lake kept its steady grammar. The house behind them held laughter and the pleasant clatter of plates. "Happy?" Adrian asked. Nora weighed the word. "Not simple," she said, "but right." He turned to face her fully. "You were here on your own terms," he said. "That matters." "It does." She studied his face, the silver at his temples, the lines earned rather than suffered. "Thank you for making space. And for refusing to let the wrong story stand." "I set a rule," he said. "You did the brave part." They stood quietly while the light lowered itself. The future did not announce itself with trumpets. It arrived the way evening does, by degree. Adrian lifted her hand to his lips, and then, as if something old and accurate had simply aligned, kissed her. It wasn't theatrical. It didn't ask the sky to participate. It was a seal on a promise neither of them was reckless enough to define yet. When they went back inside, the night had shifted from ceremony to celebration. Vivian raised a glass toward Nora with a grin that said, "I told you so," without the labor of words. Lila drifted past later with a compliment about the flowers. It was almost gracious. It would do. By the time the lights softened and the quartet closed their folders, the room was a low hum of contentment. Outside, the air held that after-rain coolness even without rain. Nora and Adrian found coats and quiet. "What happens now?" she asked. Not because she needed a schedule, but because naming can be a kindness. "Now," he said as if the word had waited politely, "for decades we keep doing the right work. You restore the paintings, I keep the house honest. We try to deserve whatever this is." His thumb brushed her knuckles, once a punctuation mark. "We see where it takes us." Nora looked back at the ballroom, at her son, laughing with friends, at new family, trying on the shape of itself, at a house that had remembered how to be a home, and felt something like consent rise in her. She had not been permitted, she had chosen. The difference was everything. "Then let's begin," she said. They crossed the threshold together, the old stones taking their weight without complaint. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.